Okay, it is 6 o'clock and I will call this meeting of the Lunenburg Town Council to order. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that we are in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. And with that, I'll look for a motion to approve our agenda. Moved by Councillor Bertle, seconded by Councillor Ernst. Are there any additions or deletions? Seeing Councillor Halverson.
I don't see Councillor Sanford on our meeting.
Oh, thank you on that point of order. She's on the attendees side. Can we bring her over, Heather, please?
Yep, she should be popping up any second.
There we go.
There we go.
Here
Thank
I
you for that,
am.
Councillor Halverson.
Thank you.
All right, so it's been moved and seconded that the agenda be approved. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Next item of business is the approval of the minutes of the last meeting. Can I get a motion to approve those, please? Moved by Councillor Sanford, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Any errors or omissions to note? Seeing none. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. We have no public hearings or presentations tonight, so that takes us on to a request to proclaim VON Week, May 23rd to 29th, 2021. Is it anybody's pleasure to move that as presented? Moved by Councillor Bertle, seconded by Councillor Ernst. Any discussion or debate? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Next, we have a request to proclaim May 30th to June 5th as Access Awareness Week. So similarly, is there anyone who would like to move that motion as presented? Moved by Councillor Duggan, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Is there any discussion or debate? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. We received a 12 months prior notice letter from the Department of Municipal Affairs that's worthy of note. And that takes us on to business arising from the minutes or unfinished business, water utility residential installation and commercial meters upgrade proposal. There is a staff report related to this and consultants were engaged and they are here to present their report. So I will turn the floor over to them.
Thank you, Council. My name is Blaine Rooney, and my colleague Jerry and Iser and I did this report. I'm going to give you a bit of a history. Jerry and I are either semi or mostly retired, and we have spent a lot of years in the utility business, and we do mostly work now for municipal utilities, mostly in the rate structures and consulting. So that's what we do. We do the majority of water rate studies in this province, and we have done a significant number of sewer rate studies too. I'll start by saying the vast majority of water utilities in Nova Scotia are fully metered. Now this has been a fair bit of transition. I've been doing this since for the last 10 years. I was Director of Finance and Customer Service for Halifax Water for 27 years. Jerry is a civil engineer and did a lot of utility engineering with Dillon Consulting for more years than that. In the last 10 to 15 years, the town of Antigonish has gone to full metering. The county of Antigonish has gone to full metering. Town of Pictou, Parsbro, which was a town but is now not, and the town of Amherst. In addition to that, we've done metering studies for the city of Dieppe, and we're currently doing one for the town of Cornwall, PEI, which is a suburb of Charlottetown. So this is not our first kick at the can. So we were asked to do this. So I'm going to turn it over to Jerry now, who's going to go over through a PowerPoint presentation, the result of our review.
Thank you very much, Blaine. Thank you, Council, for inviting us to look at metering with you. I have the next slide. What we were asked to do was, get some background. Water meters installed in commercial properties in Lunenburg. Meters readings are obtained quarterly any in-person meter reads for all customers except for 3 very large customers. You have Highliner, the hospital, and the Board of Trade campground in the summer, and they're read monthly so that they can get the cash flow a little better. And meter reading and maintenance, as everyone knows, is pretty tedious. These times of COVID, it's even more tedious as we're learning very quickly. And on the residential side, there are no meters at all. Your residents, we did your previous rates, so your residents are billed at what we call a flat rate. So regardless of how much water they use, they get a single bill for that by the quarter. Next slide. The meter review was to identify the number of metered and unmetered customers, look at your usage, what we think it would be with and without, review your existing meter types, what you have in where they're at in their age, review the billing system for capability, which is Blaine's department more so than mine, reviewing metering technology, which is both of us, and estimate the cost of the preferred technology. With that, we actually worked with your town engineer, Dennis, who had done quite a bit of work. And so he provided us the background information on that because he had actually solicited pricing from a supplier in preparation for looking at metering. And then to find up is we're going to discuss a little bit with you sort of the benefits and the what I call advantages and disadvantages of metering, because there's, like everything else, there's some of each with them. So with that, next slide. So what you have right now is 194 commercial meters. The majority of them have been serviced for over 20 years. I actually checked today, and in 2001, you had 176 customers, and the rates for 2001 were set in 1994. So to have a meter rate set in 1994, I would guess that the meters came in service somewhere around 1994. The expected life on a water meter is 20 years. And after 20 years, what happens is they slow down. I tell everybody water meters are like people. As we get older, we go slower. And that's exactly what happens with water meters. So what in essence happens is that old meters still give you reads, except they're not accurate. And in fact, you are providing more water to the customer than they are paying for. And that's never a great way to be. And you have just over 1,150 residential unmetered customers at the present time. So you have a small number metered, and the meters are old and more than likely reading slow. And then you have over 1,150 customers to be metered. Next slide. Right now in Canada, in your case, we looked at what we estimate. We use estimates varying between 50 and 60,000 imperial gallons. I'm not sure which language everybody wants to be in, but that's about 227 cubic meters. And because most utilities are switching to a metric measurement of water. That's what we think is probably a fair estimate for an average customer. People, when they're on flat rates, we find they don't pay much attention to leaky toilets or leaky faucets or that sort of thing. So we find there's quite a bit of water going into the house that never really gets used, but it's being consumed in the house or in the property. For a comparison, I looked up what Bridgewater, Mahone Bay, and Bridgetown were using. They were what I called the low end. They use about 26, they're all metered. They use about 26,000 imperial gallons per year, or 118 cubic meters on an average residential connection. And that's their average across their whole residential base. On the high end, we have Shelburne, Yarmouth, Kentville, and they're at about 40,000 imperial gallons, so 182 cubic meters a year. So you can see there's immediately at least a 20% discrepancy and maybe more between metered and unmetered water usage. Next slide. The current billing system is proven to be effective for metered customers, and based on conversations between Blaine and Lisa in the at the town office, it appears that the system is capable of handling more metering customers. Commercial meters are billed quarterly, except for the 3 large ones. Residential customers right now are billed quarterly on a flat rate. I just put a note in here because what we're finding lately is that more water utilities are talking to us about switching to bi-monthly billing. And they're doing that because water is becoming more expensive. The other thing that's happening is quite often people are starting to add sewer bills onto water bills. Water in equals water out. And to smooth out the payment schedule, they're switching over to, instead of 4 bills a year, they're switching over to 6. I'm just putting that in as something for you to think about. And as we go forward, so maybe, you know, if you go ahead with some of these things, we can chat about that again, about the advantages, and we can also talk to staff about the increased costs, because there will be more costs associated with it. But it does make a little better customer service in some areas. So if I can, next slide. So in Canada, we have 2 major suppliers. Now that you can buy probably as many as 6 or even 8 or 9 different types of meters, but many of them are only produced in the US or in Great Britain, and all they have here is sales agents and not what I would call good service departments. But we have 2 suppliers that do have sales and service in Canada. That's Neptune and Census. They both have operations in Eastern Canada and Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and Newfoundland. The utility right now, the Lunenburg utility currently uses Neptune meters. And I will say, without promoting one over another, Neptune is by far the most common meter right now in Atlantic Canada, and probably the most common meter in Canada. Both companies offers what we call positive displacement meters, which is actually the amount of water going through. It has to move a membrane or a dial in order to get through. So it's a what we call pretty reliable old-fashioned technology, if you can imagine it. It has like a little impeller in there, and it turns, and as it turns the gauge. They're housed in a bronze fitting. Now, Census is now offering electronic measuring in a plastic housing as an alternative. And it, of course, is using some wizardry that old guys like me don't fully understand, but I'm willing to accept it. And all meters that we're talking about here meet what I call the AWWA, which is the American Water Works Association standard for water meter accuracy. And for those that don't know, the water industry right now depends heavily on the American Water Works for setting standards for pipe quality, for materials quality, for a whole list of things. The AWWA probably has 15,000 members in North America, and they have a large research department that actually sets and writes standards and guides for things, including preparation of water rate studies. They actually have a manual on that as well. Next slide. So the meter readout options, I think, are really quite interesting what they've changed. In days gone by, it was always what we call direct read. You know, someone had to go in the house, they had to go to the water meter, they had to lift the little cover up on it, and they literally wrote down what the numbers were. They took the numbers back, and accounting took those numbers and subtracted them from the numbers they had from the previous month, and we ended up with consumption. More common today, and by far the much more common, is what we call outside remote read and radio frequency read. Outside remote read still requires the person to walk up and down the street, but instead of going in the house, he actually goes over and holds a handheld recorder next to what we call a puck on the outside of a house, which is wired into the meter. It transfers the meter reading to his handheld device, and it goes back and is electronically transferred. And radio frequency, which is now really catching on big time, is you can read them by walk by, or you can even, most places are reading what we call drive by. In other words, they have a computer in their car, they drive down the street, and they read everyone's water meter. The next step up from that is what's referred to as a fixed network. And, Blaine and I have spoken about your situation here, and certainly we think that it should be something that if you go ahead with metering, you should look at, because just the shape of the town is quite conducive to putting one central tower in, and literally at a push of a button from the town office, every water meter in town would be read. So it's all about efficiency. And as I said at the bottom, as the list progresses and the systems get more expensive but to install, but much more cheaper to read. So it's you're trading one for the other. Next slide. Our thinking for you is that, like I said, you go to either a drive-by or a fixed network. We certainly have used drive-bys in a lot of places where we've had people that we work with have used drive-bys, and they found them to be very effective. And like I said, the driver, the town employee would literally drive around the streets, read all the meters. Probably, we estimated from talking with staff, probably in a half a day or thereabouts. And then they literally take the laptop that they're using back to the office, and it downloads, and or their reading device, and it downloads, and you end up with all the meter reads transferred directly into your accounting system. Next slide. So the scope of the work, in your case, you would need to upgrade that 194 meters. There is a possibility that the 3-inch and the 6-inch meters could be what we call sort of freshened up by the manufacturer. We'd have to talk to them, because it appears that the meters are probably 25 years old at least. And it may be simply cheaper to buy a new one than it is. The smaller sizes, they don't do what they call an upgrade and a retrofit on them, where they come around, they check them for accuracy, replace certain parts, clean things up, and then put it all back together again. Larger meters, that's much more common in, but for right now, what we've assumed in our estimates is that we would simply replace all 194 meters at this time. And that would give the whole system a completely fresh new meters, all with the electronic radio frequency capability to them. Next slide. And then on the residential side, you need 1,153 meters purchased, and they all have to be installed in existing housing. And that's something that takes a little more effort. So next slide. We looked at what that would cost. As I said, this was with a lot of input from Dennis, your town engineer, and we looked at the hardware costs. He actually contacted Neptune, got hardware costs and all of them. We got installation estimates. We had some certainly installation costs from the town of Pictou and the county of Antigonish, which had in the last 3 years done theirs. So they provided information and looked at what it would take to get in. This is the type of thing that some companies are quite adept at doing, and certainly Neptune did both of those last two towns, or the town and the county. So it comes out to about $1 million, and with contingency and allowance for HST, it's about $1.2 million to switch over to metering. Next slide. So what's the advantages of having a metered system? One is the user pays, and for us that are involved in the water rate setting business, one of the constant questions that the Utility and Review Board asks us, do we consider the rates fair and equitable? And we strive to get the rate structures to be fair and equitable, but whenever we have a fixed rate or a flat rate system, we really can't comment on how fair and equitable they are, because not all users use the same amount of water. You know, there can be a home with a single older guy in it like me and his puppy, and we wouldn't use near as much water as a household with 2 teenagers, because I went through that stage where showers could last indefinitely. So that's the difference. Reduced usage, we feel, will happen in your case from where we think you're at right now, and it could be over 20%, we think, within the first couple of years. Probably 15 in the first year is what we've observed, and then more. Most of that is actually in people fixing things in their houses that leak. And part of this program, if you go ahead with it, will be to get the word out early, to talk to people about fixing leaks. The toilet that's been leaking, just simmering away there, and making a small noise, which becomes white noise after a while. Get it fixed, and look at some of the older toilets, and because they're 13 liters per flush on an old toilet, the new ones are now 6.5 liters. So you can see where the difference is. And, you know, believe it or not, in an average household, close to 50% of the water used is used in the bathroom. Okay, so it's either toilet flushing or showering or bathtub filling. So that's half the water. So that's the first place you go looking for that what I call looking for the cut down the water usage going into from flat rate to metered rates. It helps with water system management. It'll help your engineering and public works department improve leak detection, because for the first time, they'll know how much water they sold versus how much water they treated at the water treatment plant and actually put in the system. And those two, the difference between those two is what I refer to as unaccounted for water. We know where some of it goes. We know we flush hydrants and we do things like that, but a great deal of it is lost to leaks, and we really don't even know where to start, because if we don't have a meter that sold water versus meter that supplied water, there really isn't a good yardstick to go on there. So you can lower your supply costs. I warn everybody that generally they only go down by chemicals and electricity, because you still need manpower. The treatment plant is still there, but perhaps you don't have to expand the treatment plant as quickly in the future. So instead of it, if you're growing and you say, well, I got to add some more pieces to my treatment plant, that doesn't happen. If you get the meters in there and you actually cut your consumption down by 20%, then suddenly, you know, you're going to find yourself with surplus capacity, shall we call it, for new development or for longevity in the existing water treatment system. You'll reduce your sewer loadings with it, because when water consumption goes down, it is water in and water out, and that 50% rule that at least half of it goes through the bathroom, a great deal of it goes through kitchen sinks. Very little of it actually goes to washing cars and watering gardens, but the rest of it is certainly in the household. And it links from our side, it links what we call supply cost to revenue. So suddenly there is a linkage between the water you sell and the water you treat. And it in many cases offers customers what we call more control over their bills. So they can be conscious, they can decide if they want to run the garden hose in the backyard and let the kids play on it, or if they want to, you know, let the hose run. The engineer in Antigonish told us that his biggest thing that he noticed after putting in meters was he had no wet sidewalks in the morning. People would leave their lawn sprinklers on all night, and they suddenly started turning them off. So he said that was one of the things he noticed about it. And as Blaine calls it, the careful user benefit. Next slide, please. It is certainly a much greater show of environmental stewardship. Water is a finite resource. We only have so much of it. I mean, we live in Eastern Canada. We feel that it's almost limitless supply. If you travel around the world much, you quickly realize that it's not a limitless supply, and that we're blessed to have as much fresh water as we do. It's certainly strongly recommended by industry, by both the people in the AWWA, the Waterworks group, and also the wastewater group recommend it, because it gives them a better control over their wastewater systems. And it's an opportunity for you, if you choose in the future, to build wastewater based on the water usage. I live in the town of Amherst. That's how I'm billed for my wastewater. I get a water bill, and at the bottom of the water bill, it says, hey, by the way, since you made that water, you got to pay the water. So here's the link between the two. Next slide, please. So the disadvantages, because there's always, I said I had to go through all of it. One is revenue security, because the flat rate, the beauty of it is whether people use a little water or a lot of water, you can pretty much predict how much revenue you're going to have from all those customers, because they all pay the same amount, regardless of how much they use. So suddenly your revenue security is now based on how much you sell. Generally, what we do is structure it a water rate so that there's a certain percentage of it comes from your base rate, which is paid by everyone, and based on your meter size, and then by water used. And that cuts down, or that improves your revenue security, because you have a constant stream of revenue for a portion of the water utilities revenue, and a portion of it that's based on how much water you sell. Cost, meters come at a financial cost. We're talking about $1.2 million. Theft, we've had instances where we put in meters and people get the idea, well, instead of cutting down on what I use, I'll just figure out a way to bypass the meter. That's always an interesting one. Not too many of that, but as everyone knows, there's always somebody around that'll break the rules. Public perception, we've certainly had people that they're afraid that it's going to cost them more to have the water. The metering implementation, we would strongly suggest a professional metering installation program. Go to either Census or Neptune, get them to give you a price, including supply and install. They both have more good capability. Certainly Neptune has a very strong capability in being able to retain local plumbers to meet the standard that you have for the water utility, and then to coordinate the program so that it literally goes street by street and things fall in place. And there's, you know, I tell everyone, Public Works is busy right now. If you try adding this to it, what you're going to end up with is a hodgepodge of things that have to be done. And yes, in some houses, there will have to be some carpentry work done, and we tried to allow for that in the cost estimate. In others, it'll be a very straightforward thing. So there is a potential for decreasing revenue due to reduced consumption. When we do rate studies, we try to build that in. So if we were doing your rate study, we'd say in the first year, you're probably going to get 15% at least reduction in water sales as far as meter charges go, and or consumption charges go, and you'd work at that. In billing implementation, bills vary depending on usage. So, suddenly it's not just sending out 1,153 bills that are all exactly the same with just different addresses. But in most cases, and in your case, there's software to do all that, and certainly it generates the bills, and you can get them out to the customers based on their exact usage. And in the short term, we generally find that there's increased service calls because people are wondering what to do. And quite often, they'll get a bill and they'll say, my God, I couldn't possibly have used that much water. And when you go and check, you'll find that they probably have a leaky toilet. I hate to say it, but that's generally what's going on there. And, and try to encourage people to do that before you start billing by meter, as opposed to not. Next slide. So what we had as an outcome is that we would recommend, because we both believe strongly in metering, and we do have a fair bit of experience with working with utilities, that you can undertake an installation program to what we call universal metering, which is metering for all your customers. You'll need to install that 1,153 new meters and replace the 194 old ones. We would recommend going to radio frequency, drive-by, or fixed network, depending on which one comes in at the best cost for you. We tend to stick, we're old school, we tend to stick with the brass body positive displacement. Those meters have been around and in service for 30 to 40 years, maybe more, and have proven to be effective. Meters can be read in a half a day. So, you're in that situation. Contract out the installation to a company with a proven track record, and that will make it easier. So next slide. The last bit of the findings is, if you have or think you're going to have any private, what we call private systems like mini home parks or strip malls, we strongly recommend that they be metered as one customer. We found mini home parks where they build the park owner owns it, and then they put individual meters in each mini home, but nobody's responsible for the leakage for the water in the pipe network inside the mini home park. And that's just a recipe for things to go bad. So we strongly recommend you just put in a single meter. If you've got a large private user, a group of condos, that sort of thing, condominiums, Blaine has lots of experience in Halifax with, you just build a whole condominium corporation. They can divvy it out to the customers based on equal payments. But trying to do each one individually turns into a nightmare, and you also run into all kinds of problems if their bill, how many people can you turn off because you only have access to one valve. So it really doesn't work out. Utility needs to ensure that staff are trained. I'm sure they are well trained, and to address customer inquiries when meters are activated. And make sure you have a good comprehensive communication plan to residents to make them aware of what's happening. The last one is one that we recommend, and that is this program we think will take about 3 years to implement from start until you start reading meters. The first year and the second year, you'll do your tendering and you'll do your install. And then for the final year, you read the meters, but you don't send out bills accordingly. But you tell people how to read their meters in the system if they want to know, so that they get an idea of how much water they're using and whether or not they have leaks in their home. It also gives you a record of what the average consumption is looking like. So when you come time after the end of that year to do a water rate study, you've actually got data to base it on. It's not just Blaine and I doing our best guess or our best estimate as to what it is. So it really is a 3 to 3.5 year program from start to finish, because getting the meters in, getting them there, and then leaving them for a year with people connected to them, but not billing them with it, and gathering the records and trying to help those ones that, just look at the data occasionally from the town's point of view. And if you got one that's really out of whack, make sure you call those people up and say, you got something wrong in your house. You're spewing a lot of water through there, and it's probably something leaking, or a broken pipe somewhere is under, under the footing or under the wall or something that's causing you to appear to have, or to have high consumption. So with that, that pretty well finished everything we did, and I can stop right here. We did, at the request of council, prepare a motion, but I'll take questions in the meantime.
Thank you, Blaine and Jerry. We will open the floor up to questions, and I see Councillor Sanford has a raised hand.
I do. Thank you through the chair. Thank you for a great presentation and a really good report. I was wondering, because not all towns are created equal, if any thought had been given to the types of residential situations in various towns. So as an example, when I think of the town of Lunenburg, we have a number of absentee homeowners. We have a number of summer residents. So not all towns are created equal in everyone's ability to be able to contribute to paying for water usage. So my concern would be, I heard you say that half of this would be a base rate for everybody, and that would be effective in that context. My concern would then come with the other half of that. It would fall mainly on the backs of the year-round residents, because there are so many people that are missing year-round. So we aren't a town that has a year-round residency.
Yeah, I'll start. We use water meters in Bedeck, and they are the princess of absentee people. About a third of their population disappears every winter. And what we do there is we actually increase the base rate a little bit. We do charge the base rate the year round, because it's called an availability charge. So the water is available. The fact that you're in Arizona doesn't mean that the water still isn't available. And then the water sales after that it's the price of the water sold is hopefully more reflective of the cost of making that water and delivering the water, so that actually the full-time customers are not paying for the part-time customers, is what our attempt is, and what the board, utility and review board, wants us to demonstrate, that we're not unfairly charging the folks that stick around all winter, and conversely that we're not unfairly, shall we say, charging the people that get the chance to shut down or leave for the winter for whatever reason. So we do try to structure the rates accordingly, and certainly the utility and review board are very aware of that situation. And as I said, certainly Bedeck is the one that we've had the most anxiety with, if I could call it that, because they have such a high absentee rate in the winter months.
Thank you.
I don't know if you want to add anything, Blaine, or not.
The only thing I would add would be that's pretty common. I mean, you still have many of the costs, and if somebody wants to take the meter out and cap the building, so then you won't charge them, but then they have to pay to get hooked up again in the spring and all that stuff. It's generally, I'm not sure how your electric utility works, but Nova Scotia Power, the same thing. Unless you want to take the meter out, they'll charge you the base charge all winter, even though you're not connected to the system. So, and Bell used to say they'll take your phone number out, but they won't guarantee you'll have the same number in the spring. So there are costs you have that utility has for operating, even though the people aren't there. And if the absentee owners aren't paying it, then the remaining residents have to pay it. So that's why they charge. That's why we figure it's a good break between the base and consumption. You pay the base because you're still hooked to the system, but you have no consumption.
Yeah.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Sanford? I just have, if the deputy mayor will indulge me, I have a relevant follow-up, which is, Jerry, Blaine, what normally would be an average split between base and consumption rates? In
a utility your size would probably be at least 50% would be charged to base rate. 50% of your revenue needs would be in that range. It will vary a bit because you've got two large users, so we have to be careful of them too. We have to be cognizant of the fact that we don't overcharge Highliner in the hospital. And in fact, I guess the campground too is going to find itself paying for the base rate through the winter months. That's the catch. is that you end up paying the base. So if I had to estimate, Mayor, I would say probably 45 to 50% range is where you would end up at. It may be subject to a hearing and subject to the board ruling on it, but I suspect that's where we would end up at with your 1,200 customers or so that you have. About 1,300 customers.
The only thing I would add to that would be you're basically, when we adjust base and consumption percentages, it's called rate design, and it's made to do a certain thing. Because it may come out in the rate study may come out a certain way, but we're allowed to make some exceptions called rate design. And what we're trying to do generally is to find that sweet spot where the utility is revenue stream is protected, so you have enough money to run the utility, but the customer can influence their bill. And so on that basis, so if they reduce their consumption, they will reduce their bill. And so we're trying to, that's where the 45 to 60% comes in. So it generally, utility your size, as Jerry said, it's usually between 45 and 55, especially when you start, because what's going to happen is, if you go to metering, your individual total consumption will reduce. History says that. So you want to make sure you've got enough revenue to project it. In Halifax, which is a much larger utility, is 80,000 customers, their base charge is a lot lower because it's spread over so many people, their base percentage.
Thank you. And it's worth noting that it's council's long-term intention to repurpose the campground within this time frame. So it may not, that may render that issue moot. Deputy Mayor.
Thanks, Your Worship. I guess I was on council the last time we did a rate review for the utility, and I know we did get a bit of a scolding, with regards to not being metered from the board. But then on the other hand, I mean, it's a real challenge for us to tell our residents that we're gonna, incur a $1 million bill and they don't really get any benefit from it. And I can't see how we're going to incur that $1 million bill without putting their consumption, without putting the burden on them. And by and large, most of the people that will benefit from it are the people that really don't reside here. So can you help us out here a little bit? Because this could give, it's the right thing to do, but it could give us a nice black eye at the same time.
I think it is the right thing to do. And I think what you will get for the residents is that people will be charged fairly for what they use. And right now, if I had to answer that question, and I was looking at a house with, say, a retired individual in it versus a home with 3 or 4 children in it, especially, like I said, teenagers, having gone through this myself, I know that they don't use the same amount of water. I mean, I track my own water usage and it's quite low. So therefore, I get the advantage of being conscious about it. So I think there is a benefit to all the customers. As Blaine says, you get to control your own fate. We've had people tell us that they can't afford to water their lawn. My first reaction is we're treating water to a drinking water standard. It really shouldn't go on a lawn. If you want to water your lawn, you should have a rain barrel, because to take perfectly good drinking water, which is a scarcity on this earth, and to take it and pour it on the ground so that the grass is green really does cause me some personal problems. So I don't do well with that one when I get asked that question. But I guess in the end, what I'm saying to you, Deputy Mayor, is that I think the big advantage is that people will pay fairly for what they get.
Yeah, I see. I know. I understand this. But it's harder for a resident, and the $1 million bill, it has to be absorbed somewhere along the line. So obviously, their rate's overall the rate has to go up to cover that initial fee. And the other side of the coin is, I mean, we're trying to attract young families to Lunenburg, and that's, again, it's going to cost them a little above average rather than below average where they might be now.
But if they come and you're on a flat rate, they're going to, then all of your senior citizens is going to be paying for their water.
I mean, the principle,
So-
the principle is, the town also operates an electric utility. And, I mean, you could flat rate it too. It's the same principle that that people that use higher users should. The other thing is, I mean, I don't know where it'll take several years to figure. I don't think it's a totally an added cost. I see metering as a legitimate capital cost of operating a water utility. But it down the road, it may mean that, number one, you really can't do a water loss control program without universal metering, because you have no idea what you're really selling, right? So
Well, that was,
you know what you're putting into the system, but you don't know what you're taking, how much you're being sold, so you don't know how much is being lost. So
well,
that's
that was that was the threat from the utility board, was that if we didn't come in line with measuring our usage, I mean, they almost told us not to come back and ask for a rate increase again. So
We were at that hearing. We're well aware of what they said.
You can tell the board hasn't changed their policy on supporting metering.
Yeah, no, I realize that. Yeah. Okay, no, good.
We get tossed around.
I'll let them go ahead.
Yeah,
I was going to say we get tossed around pretty good whenever we do a rate study at an unmetered area. Fortunately, there's only a few left.
yeah, there is no question that, like I said, there is no question that the capital cost has to be put in. But there have been cases in the U.S. where metering or reducing water loss meant that you didn't have to expand a treatment plant, because normally when you would have to. I mean, when I first went to work for Halifax Water in 1985, they were going to run out of water at Pockwalk Lake in like 4 or 5 years, and they were going to have to. They're taking less water out of Pockwalk Lake now than they were in 1985, because they're losing a lot less. They're not wasting, and consumption has actually dropped so much. So they haven't had to build a bigger treatment plant for Pockwalk. I mean, and part of that is the fact that they universally meter. I mean, and they, from that, they have a very active water loss control program, because they had, Lunenburg's not much different than Halifax. It's just Halifax is bigger, but they have a lot of lines that ran directly into the harbor. And you didn't know, you couldn't find a leak because it went in the ocean.
Just one last question, then, and I'll pass over. So, if we weren't going to undertake, the benefits of installing meters, how long would you recommend we would go before we'd have to do a rate review?
We haven't looked at your financials, but I suspect you're getting precariously close now, because I think we did the last one. I can look it up. It's laying here beside me. We did the last one in 2015, so I think your rates were set probably for 2018. I would say you're getting on the edge right now, and you have to be careful. If you build up a little surplus and then you get on the edge and you use up the surplus to pay the bills, then the rates go up really badly when you go back for a rate review, because you're already losing money. You just didn't admit it. That's all. Yeah, and that makes for a rough time for you as council. It makes for a rough time for us as consultants, because we hate being there asking for a 25% increase. It's not much fun to have people come in and tell you you're a bandit and a criminal and all sorts of things. So
It's the old story. Pay me now, pay me later. I understand that.
yeah.
Okay, thanks
and
so much.
I think, you have to, Blaine, hit on it. I think, you have to start looking at water loss, delayed costs. I mean, we've worked in areas where they've said they think they can now, with the water they saved, maybe put off expanding a dam or a treatment plant for 4 or 5 years. That would have been a $4 or $5 million expansion in one case.
Or a reservoir.
Yeah. So, you can't look at it just in straight dollars. You got to look at it as a money over time and the benefits that the utility will accrue from that.
Okay, thank you, Deputy Mayor. I have Councilors Halverson, Sanford, then Duggan.
Yeah, everyone wants to talk. Okay, thanks. I tell you what, as soon as I started hearing about water utilities and you talked about Halifax, the first thing I think about is ditch tax and explaining that to the residents of Hammond's Plains or Tantallon. And I don't want to have that conversation with the townspeople of Lunenburg. I think the struggle we have here is, as the deputy mayor has pointed out, is that, we have an existing system in place that has been functioning. I understand what you're saying, that, we'd go to the utility. Sorry, I've got two screens here. I'm trying to figure out where the heck I'm looking. But I understand what you're saying. When we go to the utility, try and get a rate, they're basically going to tell us to go pound sand until we're getting metered. And you mentioned you haven't looked at the financials. I guess my questions are more around, at this point, if we're looking at, where is it now? We talked about the personal responsibility of us. If people are, what are people paying now per household on an average, say a four person family or a retired person, and versus how much are they going to pay on top of their bill if we decide to add a $1.2 million and have to aggregate that out. I think we need that. I need to know that answer. I need to know what that's going to cost. I mean, I understand this is a long-term investment. It is, as you mentioned, it's a legitimate cost of running the utility, but explaining that to a town resident, who says, look, we've been paying for water all along this way. Why do we need to change?
Well, if you're looking to us to give you a response, I mean, basically what we feel is that having a water metering system will allow you to bill the customers fairly for what they receive. You won't see you billing customers for something they're not receiving. In the long term, certainly, I think that if you have a treatment plant right now and you're looking at, say, expanding it in 3 or 4 or 5 years, if you cut down on your consumption, that may be not 3 or 4 or 5 years, maybe 8 or 9 or 10 years. And that expansion alone might be several $1 million. So just deferring that off into the future is a benefit to you. Can I quantify all those things? No, I can't, because we could if you had an eminent water treatment program that was going to have to be expanded. But I tell everybody I've been practicing engineering for a long time. All I can tell you is that every regulatory body that I know when it comes to drinking water, that the standards that we have to meet will only become higher in the future, not lower, ever. So if anything, we won't be on an easy street saying our water treatment plant's good for the next 20 years. We've got a new parameter that we want you to treat for, whether it's some form of something growing in the water or something that we've done in the atmosphere that's getting in the water. And so our costs will go up. And if we're using more water, then there's more costs associated with it, more costs associated with operating it. So I can't answer your question directly. How do you explain to council, to customers? Our biggest issue is that we feel the system you have right now certainly isn't a fair system, in the sense you charge everybody the same amount and assume, as Blaine said, you run electric utility. How would you consider running electric utility and telling everybody, we want $2,000 a year for electricity and you can use as much as you want? And because you could do that, you could certainly set it up, because that's what we're doing with water right now.
Yeah. I think it's fair to say, I don't think the board would ever refuse to increase your rates if you needed them because you didn't need it. Metering is the council is effectively the board of directors of the water utility. So you operate and you need to run and operate the board, the water utility as best you see fit. The board is the regulator, and they strongly support metering and will continue to encourage you to meter. But ultimately, they'll make sure if you do a proper rate study and do proper budgeting and stuff, that you'll have enough money from your rates to cover your costs. That's their responsibility in this. And I won't go into the ditch tax, but one of the intricacies of Halifax is the fact that it has a regulated sewer and wastewater, or sewer and stormwater utility as well. It's just the way the act was set up. And when it was transferred from Halifax City to Halifax Water, it was set out that way. So the Utility Review Board made Halifax separate those two costs. And with all due respect to the people of Hammond's Plains, there were a whole bunch of people who were getting a free stormwater service that weren't paying for it. Other people were paying for it. So that's why I was one of them. I don't live in Hammond's Plains, but I got service for 25 years for nothing. And so I'm now paying what the board determines is my fair share. Now, there's a lot of people upset about it, but that's the way it was. And that's the way the board, because it's now under the Public Utilities Act. And that's why, one of the reasons why the board certainly encourages metering, because I say everyone is happy with the way it was. It is. I still don't think that, I know there's several, Lunenburg, like most towns in Nova Scotia, have several senior citizens, probably husband and wife, aren't big water users, and right now they're paying the same as a family of 4 kids. And well, that's, like I said, if you look at that, is that fair to them? Is it certainly fair to them? So that's the main reason. Like I said, in addition to the ability that you really can't do a water loss control program without universal metering. And that's a cost, that could be a cost saving to you, because if water loss, if you do it, then you know which mains to replace, because that's what the ones that are leaking, that type of stuff.
I think at a later time, sorry, your worship, just to finish this my thought, at a later time, again, this is beyond your purview, gentlemen, but I'd like maybe just speak with Lisa, our finance director, just to find out, what are we taking in from the utility, and are we seeing surpluses every year? Is that or are our estimates actually working?
Well, I was chiming in that I saw Lisa had come on to camera, and I was going to give her an
hello,
opportunity
Lisa.
to weigh in.
Thank you.
And that is exactly why I did turn my camera on, to try to help with Council Halverson's question. So I guess first you were just asking what is the current flat rate, and it's $149.15 a quarter. But you had asked about, do we need a rate study right now? And yes, I do think right now is the point where we would need to have a rate study. And I think some of the questions that you're asking about whether you want to go forward with metering or if you want to stay with the flat rate can be answered by going to that next step and doing that rate study analysis. And without doing that, you really can't make the decision. So it's not necessarily a decision this evening that you're moving forward and definitely putting the metering in, but it's a decision to go forward and do that analysis for a further decision about metering versus moving forward with a rate stay without metering.
I think my concern, why I'm so concerned about this, is the way that this motion is written, is that it's moved seconded the Town of Lunenburg Water Utility implement a universal metering program, with the first step being the preparation. So it's a foregone, we're actually moving right now to implement the program. And then and we've, as a second clause of that, is that we're going to be preparing the water rate study. I think the motion should be changed to reflect that we're looking for a study, not to implement a water rate system, because that's what we're, as far as the verbiage I'm reading, we're right now passing the idea that we're going to implement a universal water metering system.
No, and that's a fair point. I guess it's the way I would see it is it's a further study to see whether you want to move forward with a program.
Okay, I think that's a different conversation than, so, okay, thank you. I appreciate the clarification.
Thanks, and perhaps we'll leave it to someone on staff to try to draft a motion that better reflects that, if that's council's will at this stage, and to note that that can be done without, I don't know what would need to be done if we were to implement universal water metering within that rate study, or if we, what's the chicken, what's the egg? So perhaps somebody can, Ms. Dagley, you look like you want to weigh back in again.
Well, I guess I was just going to say, Your Worship, perhaps this is a matter to defer for this evening and come back with a further motion.
That might be good. We'll take the remaining questions, but we can come back to the next meeting. Councillor Sanford.
I just wanted to follow up with a question with regards to, is it possible for us, if I'm understanding the presentation correctly, our existing commercial water meters are ready to be replaced? So would it be possible for us to move forward with that and leave the residential as it is?
Definitely. And in fact, I would strongly recommend you change those meters because I think your revenue from those meters will go up. That people have been getting free water because of a slow meter read.
Thank you.
Right.
And maybe if I could just follow up with Councillor Sufferson's question there, was just that we do have an amount in our water utility budget that we just passed that will do some of that program in this upcoming year for those commercial meters.
Thank you, Ms. Dagley. Councillor Duggan, you had a hand up, but it's since gone down. Is that intentional or?
It was intentional, sorry. I
Okay.
mean, Ed covered part of what I was going to say, and then Susan covered the rest of what I was going to ask. And so I no longer have any questions.
Okay, thanks. Are there any, and Councillor Halverson, I noticed a hand. I assume that's an old hand.
Old hand, buddy.
Okay. So just to test for the will of council here, I'm getting a sense that the consensus is that this be deferred, that this was a good discussion and that this be deferred for this evening and a motion be brought back that that is less, what's the word I'm thinking of here, conclusive in its determinations, but that undertake a water rate study.
Got a new hand now.
Okay.
Yeah. Your worship, I think I'm not opposed to a motion at this point to implement a universal water a study. If we can phrase the motion to go forward with the study, I think we can, perhaps vote on that now, and then when we get the results of that study, that would be the appropriate time to vote on whether or not we want to implement the universal water metering program.
Yeah, and I think just rather than trying to write a motion by committee, which we've known in the past is not conducive to the best use of everyone's time, this can be delayed for 2 weeks while we come up with some different language. Sound good?
Sure.
Okay. All right, that takes us on to item B. Thank you, gentlemen, for the presentation.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the questions.
Instructive, and the report was very detailed, and we appreciate that.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Ed, you can put your old hand down now.
Okay, that takes us on to item B.
Site.
Proposed draft amendments to the provincial volunteer recognition and representative volunteer selection process policy. This is in light of the winding up of the Recreation Committee, and the amendments are consequent to that process. Is there anyone who would like to move that motion as presented? Moved by Councillor Halverson, seconded by Councillor Sanford. Any discussion or debate? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. That takes us on to the Plan B project, housing project joint task force proposal. The recommended motion there is to refer this to committee of the whole for discussion, staff report and recommendation. Is it anyone's pleasure to move that motion as presented? Moved by Councillor Duggan, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Is there any discussion or debate? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. That takes us on to committee meeting recommendations. The only item there is the 2021-22 capital budget that was recommended from our committee of the whole meeting of May 4th. And I would look to council if it is anybody's pleasure to move that as recommended. Moved by the Deputy Mayor, seconded by Councillor Bertels. Is there any discussion or debate on that motion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? I'm taking that as unanimous unless anybody corrects me. There was a bit of a delay with all the hands. Okay, approved unanimously. The capital budget is in the bank. New business. We had two vacancies in the interim since the last meeting, one on the Planning Advisory Committee and one on the Heritage Advisory Committee. There is a motion presented to advertise for those positions. Is it anybody's pleasure to move that motion as presented? Moved by Councillor Bertels, seconded by Councillor Ernst. Is there any discussion or debate on that motion? Seeing none, Councillor Sanford, sorry.
I'm just wondering, when we advertise, can we, because I think of the direction that we're going in the context of the diversity committee and so on, can we include individuals that are members of the BIPOC community to apply? And or is it possible to encourage women to apply?
Thank you, Councillor Sanford. We can certainly encourage it and say that that is encouraged. Currently, we don't have, correct me if I'm wrong, Madam Clerk, we don't have anything in our policy that registers a preference as far as criteria. That's certainly something we'll be looking to correct, I'm sure, but I just want to, but in the interim, encouragement is, I think, the right word.
You are correct, Your Worship.
Okay. And of
Thank
course,
you.
these remain council appointments, and council's at liberty at this juncture to appoint them on whatever basis it sees fit. So, thank you for that. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion. That takes us on to our in-camera meeting, and I would look to a motion to move in camera to discuss the noted items there. If I could get that from somebody. Moved by Councilor Bertle, seconded by Councilor Sanford. Any discussion or debate? Seeing none. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried, and with council's consent, we'll take a 10-minute recess